really didn't accomplish much in his life. And this party that throws in Daniel 5 is really kind of an indication of how he loves to take credit for what others have accomplished. And so he throws a party and he brings all of the vessels that his father Nebuchadnezzar and this is the Jews in this case, by using the sacred vessels and having a party with those sacred vessels. And so that's what Belshazzar is doing. As a matter of fact, you'll notice that the text said in verse 3 that these came from the house of God. And so they were important parts of Old Testament worship according to Mosaic law. And then you'll notice in the next verse, in verse 4, they drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, and so on. So this was a direct insult to the one true God. And this is why this judgment is falling upon him. So verse 5, suddenly the fingers of a man's hand emerges and began writing opposite the lampstand on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. Archaeology has proven, as we have excavated the remains of the ancient city of Babylon, that they didn't have white plaster walls. And so this is something that has been proven historically, archaeologically. And on this backdrop appears this hand. Now, there's no arm, there's no body, it's just a hand. Is that not freaky or what? That would freak anybody out. And this hand begins writing on the wall. Meanwhile, the text tells us how the king's face grew pale. This obviously scared him. His thoughts alarmed him. His hip joints went slack. His knees began knocking together. People say, I don't really believe that you can be so nervous that your knees knock together. The Bible says it. The Bible confirms that can in fact happen, and it's happened to this guy named Belshazzar. So the king called aloud, bring in the conjurers. We're going to get all of the wise men, and we're going to find somebody that can read this inscription that the hand is written on the wall. And Belshazzar promises him great power and great wealth, whoever can read the inscription. But as we already saw in chapter 2 and in chapter 4, the Babylonian kingdom, and so they're not up to the task here. And they cannot read the inscription, so they cannot make known the interpretation of the inscription. Well, that made Belshazzar even more nervous. I didn't know if that was possible to become more nervous, but he's greatly alarmed. His face grew even paler, and his nobles were perplexed. All of this is language that certainly could have been a lot more emphatic, but it's just given us the nuts and bolts of what is going on. Verse 10, the queen entered the banquet. Now, this is not the wife of Belshazzar. We were told in verse 2 that all of his wives were already there at the banquet. This is talking about the queen mother. And in all, the daughter of Nebuchadnezzar and the mother of Belshazzar. And so she's able to just walk right into the feast. And so because of the words of the king, do not let your thoughts alarm you, or your face be pale. There is a man in your kingdom in whom is a spirit of the holy gods. Notice how she language, similar to language that we had already seen in chapter 2. And in the days of your excuse me, illumination.
To take your call, please leave a message after the tone.
He's got wisdom of the gods, magicians, conjurers, Chaldeans, and divine. We asked a question in chapter 2. Nebuchadnezzar called in all of the diviners and the conjurers and the wise men. Part of that. And the text never answers the question, because the text seems to indicate that they were a part of the inner circle of the king's closest advisors. But whenever there's an event like this, they're not there. And I can understand why they're not here in this party, but they're not a part of the first group of the wise men and the diviners and the conjurers that come in. And she says in verse 12, this was because of an extraordinary spirit, knowledge and insight, interpretation of dreams, explanations of enigmas, and solving of difficult problems were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Let Daniel now be summoned, and he will of Nebuchadnezzar. Well, Daniel, and you'll know she is able to detail and interpretation that Daniel also says it's because he's got a spirit of the gods. Now, that's the way they spoke back. He's very close to his own. Maybe he doesn't like those names that are close to his own. Calls him Daniel, one of the exiles from Judah, whom my father the king brought from Judah. Now I have heard about you that a spirit, once again, we would say that you are inspired of God. But he's polytheistic. He says the spirit of the gods, plural, and that illumination, insight, and extraordinary wisdom has been found in you. Now, we could spend time talking about what all of these differences mean. Spectrum of do counsel kings as far as political issues and problems. What's going on with come into the king's presence? Are they come the desire to, he had an ability to read, to and interpret dreams and visions. And so, verse 15. Just now the wise men and the conjurers were brought in before me, that they might read this inscription and make the interpretation known to me. But they could not declare the interpretation of the message. All right, so the king is laying it out, telling Daniel exactly where we are at this. Obviously, the message very much there and visible. He said, but I personally have heard about you, that you were able to give interpretation and to solve difficult problems. Now, is he saying that because his brother just told him that? Or what? Well, we don't know. That you're able to read the inscription and make known its interpretation to me. You'll be clothed with purple, wear a necklace of gold around your neck, and you will have authority as the third ruler in King. Now, he
Denny, can you hear me? Denny? I don't know if you can hear me or not, but our internet is not working well. Denny, I'm sorry. We're just not getting a good connection here. Let me do a quick test. I hate to interrupt you, but Ron, can you hear Denny?
No.
No, I've lost him. Can you hear me, Denny?
Test.
I can
hear you.
Yeah, I can hear Denny now.
Okay. We've
Okay.
for the last about 15 minutes, Denny, you've gone in and out quite a bit where we're getting maybe 50%.
Oh, that's not going to work.
Yeah. We may just have to go ahead and close and then try again next week, unless you have another way to do it. I don't know.
Well, are you thinking that the problem is the connection on my end?
I think it's both sides are not good, because ours is okay, and then I think yours, it said that on our screen that yours has low bandwidth, so I think we're just getting a bad connection all around.
I might move to a different spot, but it's saying I've got it on connect.
Even now, I'm having trouble understanding you because you just keep going in and out. But I'm thinking we may just have to close it down this week, because well, he's got internet issues on his end as well. Say we're losing him now. I don't know if he's.
Maybe if he turns off his camera.
Denny, shut off your camera for just a minute. Let's see if that helps. All right. Can you hear me? Oh, goodness. Still not working.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Did that improve the audio at all?
Actually, it kind of did a little bit. I don't know.
It's better on my end.
Okay. Let's try it that way, Denny, and let's just see how things go. Okay.
Okay. Need to go?
Ready to go. Denny? So it is. Ron, can you hear me?
I can hear you, DeAndre. I don't hear Denny.
Yeah. Denny, can you hear us? I think we lost Denny totally.
Can you hear me?
We,
Hello,
we,
test.
we can hear you now, Denny, but we couldn't hear you there for a minute.
Wow.
I think this isn't going to work for us, Denny. I think we may just have to push back another week.
Well, do you want me to move closer to the modem just to see?
Yeah, give it a shot.
Okay.
Meeting first. Instead of iPad. Can you hear me, Denny?
Yeah, I can hear you. I'm trying to find a space.
Okay.
Where's your modem? No, not your mother, your modem for the internet. Where do you keep the modem?
It's upstairs. Are you having trouble?
Yeah, I've got a much stronger signal here. Maybe I'll. No, they're okay.
Oh, yeah.
DeAndre, is this better?
Yes, this is a lot better.
Is it really?
Yes, it is.
All right.
This light be good.
Thanks. All right, let's go from here.
All right.
You can hear me okay, right?
We can hear you. I don't know if you want to try turning your video on or not. I'll leave it up to you. But it's all yours.
No, I don't know that that's going to work where I'm at.
Okay.
Well, we can try it and see if.
All right.
All right, test.
You're good on my end.
Is that going to work?
I think so.
Okay. All right. So we are in Daniel chapter 5, and we're noticing that Belshazzar has a feast in which he is honoring his gods, and he is making fun of the one true God. And in that particular feast, they're using the vessels that came out of the house of God that was in Jerusalem. And then this hand comes and it is writes on the wall. There's no arm, there's no person. It's just a scary hand and fingers that's writing on the wall. And so, DeAndre, are we going good? Is the audio good?
Yeah, you're perfect now.
Okay. So Belshazzar calls in everybody, all of his wise men, his conjurers, and nobody can read what it says on the wall. And they obviously cannot interpret then what it means. And so the queen mother, who is not his wife, because we already noted that in verse 2, all of the wives were already there at the feast. So we're talking about the queen mother, which is his mother and probably the daughter of King Nebuchadnezzar. She explains about Daniel. Daniel has a spirit of the holy gods. And I was explaining that that's the way they said that back in ancient times. We would say he's inspired. He is an inspired man, that God is speaking through him. All right, so he calls in Daniel and he says, Daniel, I'm told that you've got this extraordinary wisdom. And so you can make known to me what the inscription on the wall says and means, and I'll make you the number 3 guy in the kingdom. Well, the number 3 guy is that which has been confirmed by history, is that Belteshazzar, the king, actually shared his kingdom with Nabonidus. And so it was what's called a co-regency. And so Daniel answered, verse 17 said, Daniel answered and said before the king, keep your gifts for yourself or give your rewards to someone else. However, I will read the inscription of the king and make the interpretation known to him. Daniel's not in it for the money. He doesn't care about what it is that Belteshazzar is offering him. Daniel is proving one of the important truths that we need to learn, and that is there are some things that are more important than money and fame, and that's what Daniel is showing here. He doesn't care about that stuff. He doesn't care about the wealth of the power. So he's got no desire for worldly gain, position, advantage. He's got other values and other standards, and so should we. The power that Belteshazzar is offering, that doesn't impress Daniel. He doesn't care about that. He's truly a man that is free from such trinkets, the gifts that the king could offer. But Daniel says, I can't tell you what it says, and I will tell you what it says. And so he says, O king, the most high God. Notice how that language was that which we had seen early in the book, is one of the important phrases in the book of Daniel, that these are people that believe in many gods, and you're not going to make a case for monotheism at this point. But if you could prove that your God is the greatest of all gods, then you have accomplished something. And so he is the most high God, granted sovereignty, grandeur, glory, and majesty to Nebuchadnezzar, your father. And because of the grandeur which he bestowed on him, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language feared and trembled before him. Whomever he wished, he killed. Whomever he wished, he spared alive. And whomever he wished, he elevated. And whomever he wished, he humbled. Now, notice how that fits one of the major theme of the book of Daniel. And so by the time we finish this book, everyone should be able to repeat the theme, and that is that God is the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. He is the one that sets up kings and kingdoms, removes kings and kingdoms. Daniel chapter 2, 20 through 23. And so Daniel is repeating what we have already identified as the theme of this book. Verse 20, he goes on giving Belteshazzar a history lesson. But when his heart was lifted up and his spirit became so proud that he behaved arrogantly, he was disposed from his royal throne and his glory was taken away from him. This is a fact that now Daniel is given or reminding Belteshazzar of. He was driven away from mankind, and his heart was made like that of the beast, and his dwelling place was with the wild donkeys, and he was given grass to eat like cattle, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven, until he recognized that the Most High God is ruler over the realm of mankind. Nebuchadnezzar had to realize he's not ruler over the realm of mankind. God is. God has given him a position, but that position should be held recognizing that God is actually the one who is in ultimate control. And then he says, and then he sets over it whomever he wishes. Again, that's what Daniel 2:20 through 23 says. Yet you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, even though you knew all of this. This is, as Paul would say in Romans, both chapter 1 and 2, you are without excuse because you knew what happened to Nebuchadnezzar, what God had done in the past. But you have exalted yourself against the Lord of heaven, and they have brought the vessels of his house, God's house, before you, and you and your nobles, your wives, and your concubines have been drinking wine from them, and you have praised the gods of silver and gold and bronze and iron, wood and stone, which do not see nor understand, but the God in whose hand are your life breath and your ways, you have not glorified. All right, so what exactly was the sin of Belteshazzar and his guests? Well, Daniel just laid it out. He has not honored the one true God, but in fact chose to dishonor God, and in some ways to make fun of him by having this particular feast. He said, then the hand was sent from him. So God sent the hand, and his inscription was written out. Now, this is the inscription that was written out. Many, many tekel uparsid. All right, this is the interpretation and the message. Many is a word that means numbered. God has, in fact, numbered or given a length of days, the length of the kingdom, and determined that its time is out. Tekel is a word that means to weigh. It's been weighed in the balances. The kingdom of Belteshazzar has been weighed in the balances and is found lacking. And then the last word, huparsin, really comes from the word Perez, which is related to the word Persian. And so the kingdom has been divided and given over to the Medes and Persians. So while he seems to think, Belteshazzar seems to think that it is his kingdom and he is the one that has the power. In fact, God is saying, no, I do. And you have been weighed, you have been found deficient, and now your kingdom is going to be given to the Medes and Persians. What we know from history is that these two nations, the nation of Media and the nation of Persia, were those that teamed together in order to conquer the mighty kingdom of Babylon. And he goes on to say, then verse 29, then Belshazzar gave orders, and they closed Daniel. Well, I've been saying Belteshazzar, and I mean Belshazzar when I'm talking about the king, Belshazzar. Belteshazzar is Daniel. And they clothed Daniel with purple, put a necklace of gold around his neck, and issued a proclamation concerning him that he now had authority as the third ruler in the kingdom. So even though Daniel said he didn't want any of that stuff, Belshazzar gives it to him anyway. Although, think about it this way, it was very short-lived power because in just a few hours, the whole thing is going to come crumbling down anyway. So it wasn't like Daniel became a filthy rich man for the rest of his life. He became a filthy rich man for about 3 or 4 hours, and then he lost it all. Because verse 30 says, that same night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was slain. Now, what we know from history is that the Medo-Persians, through an incredibly ingenious plan, blocked the Euphrates and diverted its waters because the Euphrates flowed underneath the walls of the city of Babylon. And by lowering the water on the Euphrates, that enabled his men to get into the riverbed, and they walked right in to the city unimpeded, and they captured it that very night. One of the most fortified cities in the ancient world, with walls that were so thick that they could race chariots around those walls side by side. The city was captured and was not apparently damaged at all. And then history also records that the king was in fact killed by a soldier named Sobricius. And he's the one that took the life of the king. So we learn the lessons that come from this great chapter. And again, I apologize for not having my PowerPoint, but let's talk about a few of the lessons that we get from this great chapter. First of all, God knows all that men do, both good and evil. This was a Babylonian king, but God is well aware of exactly what he's doing, how his heart was moved with pride and arrogance, and how he is, in fact, one who is making fun of the one true God in the world, the Most High God. And so when we think about the day of judgment, Revelation 20:11 through 15, God is going to bring everyone before his throne, and he is literally going to know everything about them that they've done, both good and evil. 2 Corinthians 5:10 says that as well. And that means you and me. Second lesson that we learned from chapter 5 is all men will have to give account for the choices that they have made. We're each are going to be weighed, and hopefully we're not going to be tickled. We're not going to be found weighed and found wanting. And then a third lesson is that each generation needs to learn about God's greatness. The time of Belshazzar, they had not appreciated, as Nebuchadnezzar came to appreciate the power of the one true God. All right, let's go into chapter 6. It says, it seemed good to Darius. Who's Darius? Darius is now the new king that has taken over part of the Medo-Persian Empire. We actually know historically very little about Darius, but it says he was the Mede, and he came to the throne at about age 62, and his reign was very short-lived. So anyway, we just don't know that much about this guy, except that history does in fact confirm that he was a king of the Medo-Persian Empire. All right, it seemed good to Darius to appoint 120 satraps. We would call them governors, that are over various portions as the kingdom is divided up into various sections, that they should be in charge of the whole kingdom. So you could see that these are, in fact, very powerful men, these 120 satraps. And over them, 3 commissioners, of whom Daniel was one, that these satraps might be accountable to them, and that the king might not suffer loss. So he's got a hierarchical system with him on top. Then you've got the 3 that are below him called commissioners. And then below the commissioners, 120 satraps. And we're assuming that they were divided up 40 apiece for each of the 3 commissioners. Then Daniel began distinguishing himself among the commissioners. Now remember, you're only one step away from the king. And so the 3 commissioners, they could be vying for numero uno, being the king. And as I already mentioned, Darius was already an older man as it is. And it says that he distinguished himself because he possessed an extraordinary spirit. And the king planned to appoint him over the entire kingdom. See, that's what we're talking about, is those 3 guys knew that one of them was going to rise to the top and become the most powerful of all, second only to the king himself. All right. This was the plan of the king to appoint Daniel, because he knew that Daniel was something special. Verse 4, then the commissioners and satraps, notice how this is a joint affair teaming up against Daniel, began trying to find ground of accusation against Daniel in regard to government affairs. But they could find no ground of accusation or evidence of corruption, inasmuch as he was faithful, and no negligence or corruption was to be found in him. Then these men said, we shall not find any ground of accusation against this Daniel, unless we find it against him with regard to the law of his God. All right, so notice the various categories of which, and you know they were very careful in their examination of Daniel. They're going to find something in order to ruin their reputation. You know, today we have this thing called cancel culture. And I don't know if any of you ever tune in to the gospel meeting series that Eric Owens does, but it's on YouTube, and it's called Digital Gospel Meeting. And I'm actually going to be speaking about that tomorrow night. And I'm going to be speaking about cancel culture. I hope you'll tune in and watch that. A Digital Gospel Meeting. Anyway, look at the various categories that they tried to use in order to discredit the credibility of Daniel. First of all, the text says they found no ground for accusation. That's a way of saying that on the surface, and immediately their knowledge of Daniel showed, well, we know him well enough to know that there's no ground for accusation. Second, he was faithful to his job. Now, how many people have that kind of reputation in the workplace? They arrive on time. They leave when it's the appropriate time to leave. They don't take advantage of the company. They faithfully serve the boss. Well, Daniel was what we would call the ideal employee. There was nothing that they could find in the way he conducted himself in the workplace. Good lesson for us, right? And then third, it says there was no negligence found in him. All right. When it came to the responsibilities that were given Daniel, he was not slack in fulfilling those responsibilities, doing what it is that he was commissioned to do. No corruption was found in him, means that he didn't steal from the company. He didn't better himself at the expense of the company. And then he was known to be faithful to his God. Now, this be a part of our lessons, but think about that for a minute and think about the kind of reputation that we have in the world today. People should be able to say that we're an ideal employee. We have a couple of men at Bear Valley who own companies, and they have said, to my great sadness, they won't hire Christians. And I've asked them both, why won't you hire Christians? And they both said, because Christians take advantage of the fact that I'm a brother in Christ. And so they think they can be lazy. They think they can come to work late. They think they can take extra time for lunch, and they can leave early. And I'm a brother. I'm not going to care. And I'm perfectly okay with their doing those things. But I can't run a company when you have that kind of favoritism and you have employees that take advantage of the rules. And so I don't hire Christians. Well, just as Paul told the slaves in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 1 and 2, so also could that be applied to employers, that we should actually give our very best, because when we don't, it reflects negatively upon God and upon the church and upon the doctrine of God. So we need to give our very best in the workplace. And then as far as work ethic and morality, they're looking at every aspect of Daniel's life and not finding any corruption. Well, that should also be the way it is with us, that we are Christ-like, and our language shows that we're Christ-like, that we're Christians. We're not angry. We don't use foul language. We don't curse and swear. We don't talk bad and gossip about people. There's no corruption in us. And then we're found to be faithful to our God. You know, people can see faithfulness in our lives. Church attendance is one of those examples. Now, I realize that I'm preaching to the choir, so to speak, because this is a midweek Bible study, and here you are. And I compliment you for that because in the book of Daniel, you're doing what's being described of Daniel, faithful to their God and doing the things that faithful people do. Faithful people are those that love to study God's word, love to get together with other Christians, and that's what you're doing. All right, so they're going to find accusation, and so they develop a scheme. Verse 6. They came by agreement to the king and spoke to him as follows: King Darius, live forever. All the commissioners of the kingdom, notice they say all the commissioners, but there's only 3, and Daniel's one of them, and he's not there. And so they're presuming to speak for Daniel that Daniel has also signed off on what they're about to say. The prefects, the satraps, the high officials, the governors have consulted together that the king should establish a statute and enforce an injunction that anyone who makes a petition to any god or man beside you, O king, for 30 days shall be cast into the lion's den. Now that's certain death, and they know it. And so they're devising a 30-day plan to honor only the king, and anybody that doesn't honor the king is going to die in the lion's den. Verse 8, now, O king, establish the injunction, sign the document so that it may not be changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which may not be revoked. Notice how they are taking advantage of what we know was in fact an immutable system that was a part of the Medo-Persian Empire. And that is that when the king would issue an injunction, it was then engraved in stone. It could not be changed. The king could not change his mind. Once it had been signed off on, then it had become law, and it was not ever going to be revoked. That's what they want. Because I believe they know, based on what we know from the earlier verses, the king loves Daniel, and the king intends to promote Daniel to second in the kingdom. And so they know that the king, if he was given a way to wiggle out of this, most certainly would do exactly that. Sadly, verse 9, King Darius signed the document, that is the injunction. This one foolish act is something that Darius is going to soon regret. And he'll recognize that he has made a grievous error by signing such a law. Verse 10 says, now when Daniel knew that the document was signed. So Daniel was well aware of what the document said and well aware of the fact that King Darius had signed it. He entered his house. Now in his roof chamber, he had windows open toward Jerusalem. And he continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks before his God as he had done previously. Now there's a lot to unpack there, but notice Daniel, first of all, is not going to cower in fear. He's not going to stop doing what it is that he knows that his faith demands that he do. And he also is not going to change. He is who he is, and he's going to be faithful to who he is, and he is not going to give up on his faith and his religion because of the pressures of men. And so he's going to stay faithful. And so notice what he's doing 3 times a day, praying. How often do you pray? Every day. Well, these were formal prayers. I suspect Daniel prayed more than that. But do you pray 3 times a day? Well, that would be a good example of righteous activity. Giving thanks before his God. Daniel has a lot to be worried about and maybe not be so thankful because he knows that he's got a lot of enemies. He knows that those enemies are trying to destroy him. He knows that what he is doing is going directly against an injunction of the king, but yet the text says he's thankful. You know, everything doesn't work out just the way we would want in our lives. But can we still find reason to be thankful? Well, Daniel did, and so should we. And then the text says, as he has been doing previously. Daniel didn't put on, he didn't now suddenly start acting like he was super religious, just like we shouldn't suddenly start acting like we're a super Christian. But this is always who we are, and we're consistent in our faith. Then these men came by agreement. Notice the evil plot that's being given here, and found Daniel making petition and supplication before his God. They knew what they would find, and sure enough, they found Daniel being unfaithful, just like they had suspected. Then they approached and spoke before the king about the king's injunction. Did you not sign an injunction that any man who makes a petition to any god or man besides you, O king, for 30 days is to be cast into the lion's den? The king answered, the statement is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which may not be revoked. So the king knows that he signed it, and the king knows that it can't be changed. Then they answered and spoke before the king. Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the injunction which you signed, but keeps making his petition 3 times a day. So their plan so far has worked out perfectly. Then, as soon as the king heard this statement, he was deeply grieved, and he set his mind on delivering Daniel. They already knew that Darius would try to get Daniel off of the hook, but they were not going to let this happen. But he kept exerting himself to rescue him. Then these men came by agreement to the king and said to the king, recognize, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and Persians that no injunction or statute which the king establishes may be changed. So he's stuck, and there's really nothing at this point he could do about it. Then the king gave orders, and Daniel was brought in and cast into the lion's den. As much as Darius hated to do that, he had to do it. The king spoke and said to Daniel, your God, whom you constantly serve, will himself deliver you. I can't do it. But it's interesting that Darius would say this. Somehow the king was aware of Daniel's God and was aware of the power of Daniel's God. And so he expresses his faith that Daniel's God will be able to deliver him. This is the same word, by the way, that was used in chapter 3 when Nebuchadnezzar says, no one can deliver you from my hand. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, our God is able to deliver us. And so this is an important word in the book of Daniel. God can deliver. Notice in 2 Timothy chapter 4, there toward the end, Paul talks about being in the lion's den and talks about God being able to deliver him. And he's talking about from the hand of the Romans. And he's not meaning being spared from trial, but that God's going to deliver him to his heavenly kingdom. That's what he says there. Verse 17, and a stone was brought and laid over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signet rings of the nobles, so that nothing might be changed in regard to Daniel. No one's going to be able to sneak in and rescue Daniel. If the stone was moved, the signet seals would be broken, and they would know that it was tampered with. Then the king went off to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no entertainment was brought before him, and his sleep fled from him. He really is a good man and a good king and a good friend of Daniel. And this really bothers him that this has happened. The king arose with the dawn, and at the break of the day, he went in haste to the lion's den. And when he had come near to the den to Daniel, he cried out with a troubled voice. The king spoke and said to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you constantly serve, been able to deliver you from the lions? Then Daniel spoke to the king. Imagine how the king felt when he heard the voice of Daniel come from the lion's den. O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me. Lions just don't do that. But God had to intervene and supernaturally kept the mouths of the lions closed, inasmuch as I was found innocent before him, and also toward you, O king, I have committed no crime. Then the king was very pleased and gave orders for Daniel to be taken out of the den. So Daniel was taken out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. Notice how the text is not just telling us one of these great Bible stories about Daniel and the lion's den, but that this was an event that was caused because of a man's faith, an event that because of the man's faith brought about envy and hatred on the part of others, was an event that troubled the king, who knew enough about Daniel to know about Daniel's faith and to know about Daniel's God, because the king is saying, I believe that your God can deliver you. And then it's a lesson about faith rewarded. Then the king gave orders, and they brought those men who had maliciously accused Daniel. Now the king knows that there was no good in these guys at all. There was a malicious intent on their part. And he cast them, their children, and their wives into the lion's den. And they had not reached the bottom of the den before the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Well, we're talking about 120 satraps plus families. That was, but those were hungry lions. And then Darius, the king, wrote to all the peoples, nations, and men of every language who were living in the land, may your peace abound. I make a decree that in all the dominion of my kingdom, men are to fear and tremble before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God and enduring forever, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed, and his dominion will be forever. You know, we made an observation at the end of chapter 4 that the last words that came from the lips, the recorded words of lips that came from Nebuchadnezzar, were in praise and acknowledgement of the one true God. And now we have the same with Darius. Is it possible, and I hope so, that we will see both Darius and Nebuchadnezzar in heaven because these Gentile kings did acknowledge the one true God. He goes on to say, verse 27, he delivers and rescues and performs signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, and who has also delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So he knows about the power of God, and he acknowledges God and praises God. So this Daniel enjoyed success in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus, the Persian, who did have a much longer reign than did Darius. And so this whole event dates approximately 555 BC. And that would mean that Daniel was probably in his 80s, maybe even as old as 90. And so the man that was thrown in the lion's den was a very, very old man. And that's Daniel at this time. Okay, well, that's a good place to start, finishing chapter 6. And so next Tuesday night, we'll pick up with chapter 7. DeAndre?
Denny, we had one question, and it was, what time is the gospel meeting starting tomorrow night?
I believe it's same time as this, 7 o'clock. Yeah, it is, because it's 5 o'clock Denver time.
Okay, so 5 o'clock your time.
Yeah.
Okay, good. And what was the name of it?
It's the digital gospel meeting.
It's on YouTube.
It is on YouTube. It's on Facebook too. I think they do a live stream, but it is on YouTube as well.
Okay, I may send it out to the congregation so we can watch
Oh,
it.
please do. That'd be great.
Well, all right, Denny, we appreciate your time, and thanks for being
Sure.
patient with the internet issues. Okay.
Yeah, glad we got that all worked out. All
Yes,
right.
sir. You take care, Denny.
All right. Good night to everyone. We'll see you next week.
Yes, sir.
Thank